We had a doping culture. Nobody even knew where the moral compass was anymore. It was possible to beat the system. It was the game. That sporting world that we want to put on that paragon of excellence has actually been corrupted by the normal world. I love bike racing. It's still the thing I love most. But there's a very fine line between love and hate. I was never going to dope. I'm not going to become one of those dickheads. Eventually I gave up. And I thought, I can't beat them or join them. I was arrested and they found syringes in my apartment. I blamed it all on the sport. Societal expectations can be overpowering. You have to get to a point where the athletes do not want to take drugs. That's talking about whole cultural changes. After my first year off, I wanted to try and fix everything I'd done and the disappointment, and I wanted to go back to my old values, started to feel like I had a good culture around me. And then I did the Tour of Spain. When I won that, I had a press conference afterwards, and I said to everybody, I did that clean. And that empowered me, and it gave gravitas to what I felt was my responsibility, to educate people on how it happened and why it happened. You can't change things if you don't understand them. Sport really does represent something that we've got to protect. That last bastion of purity, it's worth fighting for.
They say that the human race is doomed, that we have lost touch with our true nature, that the media has corrupted us, and that the planet has no future. I disagree. I believe that humanity is full of hope, and that our salvation lies within each one of us. My name is Brian Rose, and my job is to listen, the oldest method of learning known to man. Each week I seek out individuals that are changing the world, people who are living and thinking in a different way. Their stories will challenge your beliefs, make you question your choices, and perhaps inspire you to change. I never planned on doing any of this, but now I can't stop. Join me on this mission and make humanity something we can all be proud of.
David Millar is one of Britain's most successful road cyclists. He competed in 12 Tours de France. He even beat Lance Armstrong in one stage, and he later became good friends with him. But in 2004, he was banned for taking prohibited substances and spent 2 years in exile and came back and competed clean. Today, he's one of the leading spokesmen for the anti-doping movement. And David talked very real with me about using EPO, testosterone, and a whole lot of other drugs in order to increase his performance, and how it really ripped him up inside when he had to come clean about doing it. And the reason I talked to him about this is because it's such an important topic in all sports today. Whether you saw the movie Icarus or whether you watch the UFC, it's a reality when athletes compete. And David believes it can be solved culturally. And he said now on the British cycling team, it's a culture that doping is not okay, it's not acceptable. And he says that is what will change things, not the testing. So I know you're gonna enjoy my time with him. He's got a lot to say. He's a serious guy who's really competed, and I really enjoyed my time and this topic. And I also enjoy the London Reel Academy. And inside there, we teach you how to do pretty much anything in 6 to 8 weeks because we hold you accountable to do the work. No more procrastination, no more perfectionism. I teach you how to start a business, how to publicly speak, even how to broadcast yourself. We do this. I've graduated over 3,000 students. It's absolutely incredible. Here's a little bit more about what we do.
London Reel doesn't stop when the conversation ends. You see, that's when we get started. Because everything begins with a thought, and then comes the action. The London Reel Academy is our global transformation platform. Here we bring together thousands of students from over 75 countries. Whether you want to build a profitable business from your passion, or learn to speak to inspire, or broadcast yourself with your very own podcast, or accelerate your life to become a high-performance person, we have the online accountability course and personal mentoring program that will make your dream a reality. Join us, and we'll take your life to the next level, together. Our next accelerator course is starting soon.
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is David Millar, one of Britain's most successful road cyclists who's competed in 12 Tours de France, winning 5 stages and once beating Lance Armstrong in the process. In 2004, you were banned from the sport for 2 years after taking performance-enhancing drugs and later returned to compete clean. You're now a key spokesman on anti-doping and are featured in the recent documentary film Time Trial. David, welcome to London Real.
Thank you.
As you know, I got on a bike a few months ago because I got challenged to do an Ironman 70.3, and you know, for a lot of people, the swim is like a big deal, but for me, I found the cycling part just so challenging, and I found that I was on that static bike in the gym, pounding out the hours, or when I was like 4 or 5 hours and my feet were freezing, when I was riding around Regent's Park. I was just like, I gained a new respect, I think, for cyclists, even though I probably just scratched the surface. But what can you tell people about what drives someone to be a professional cyclist? And what do people not know about it when they just watch it on TV?
Yeah, that's a good question actually, because to be a pro cyclist, cycling the sport isn't something you do at school. It's not something that schools generally endorse. You don't have a school cycling team or inter-school competitions. It's something you have to do outside of the curriculum, outside of the societal norms, if you like, which already paints a picture of the type of personality that pursues cycling. They're outliers, they're kind of tend to be slightly free spirits. And I think one of the reasons you get into cycling as a kid is to get away from everybody, is to have the freedom. So I've always found it paradoxical that these kind of individuals, these loners, they get into cycling, end up doing some races, move up quickly from the ranks of regional to national to international to world class, go to professional. By the time you get to professional, you're in this hyper team environment where you can't move without being with somebody. You share rooms, you're on the road the whole time. The teams have strict hierarchies with organisation within them. So you've gone from where you set off as trying to get away from everybody to actually in the most closed sporting experience perhaps possible. But that's how you start. And I've always found that interesting. I think it paints a pretty clear picture of what you deal with when you're doing professional cyclists. They're often quite quirky people. And that's just the psychology. That's not even going into the physiology of it all.
And what makes a great cyclist? Did you have to be willing to endure more pain than the other person? I mean, I always look at the ones that finish and I'm like, you know, sometimes their bodies look kind of the same and I'm just, is it a mental thing? Do they go to these dark places that none of us understand?
Yeah, it's, you have to have the genetic makeup, if you like. I think, because it is an ultra endurance sport, so you can have the best will in the world. And I am a bit of a believer that although you have to be incredibly, you have to have the right mental capacity, you've got to be able to have be born with the right genetics, be able to kind of have that endurance gene. Now, if you've got that, then that's great, but I know dozens and dozens, 95% of the people even with that genetic makeup, perhaps are even walking around here or working here and they don't know they've got it. So to stumble across it and then recognize it and then work at it, then that's the next level. And then the next level is those people who fall in love with the work, appreciate the kind of the dividends it returns, and then start to challenge themselves. And it's always that, you challenge yourself. First of all, you start competing. I think you start competing against yourself, then you compete against other people, then you start competing against yourself. And once you get to that meta level, that kind of that real sort of the upper stratosphere, you only care about competing against yourself. And it's the journey you're on, the training, the workload, the challenges you set yourself, those objectives. And they're the greatest athletes, the ones that only kind of are in their own sphere and challenging, pushing themselves to the very edge of what they can do and able to compartmentalize that. And I've always seen that with the greatest professional cyclists. They're incredibly rational human beings. And yet they're putting themselves in the most high stress emotional situations, physically, mentally. But their ability to rationalize the situation takes them to that real kind of super level. And I think that's the same in all alpha athletes, male and female. They're able to kind of get to that sort of, I think there's different names for it, the zone, the kind of, the flow state.
Right.
And that flow state is the super X factor that the real mega athletes have.
Were you able to get yourself in that flow state?
I could hit float state. And it would only happen a handful of times a year. I mean, even at my peak level, I could hit flow state maybe 5-6 times. And flow state was when everything it's almost out of body. You disappear into yourself. Your inner monologue kind of sort of evaporates to a certain degree. Everything becomes one. And you're seeing things before they happen. Your body map becomes perfect. You control everything. You've lost that panic. You can you're controlling everything. Just fits. It's like this kind of state of absolute, flow. That's why we say flow.
Is there usually some exhaustion before that happens, or can you snap into it at the beginning of a ride?
You can manage it. That's what I mean. You manage the exhaustion. I mean, I get it most often in time trials, which is my speciality, which is the solo kind of point-to-point racing.
Is that a short distance?
It could be between 5 minutes and an hour and a half, depending on the event. You could go from a 3K to a 60-kilometer time trial. I could do both at my best. And there you could get to a point where you sort of meditation, where you can have micro explosions within the event. You're fit enough to recover from those, depending on the course. And again, the goal with the time trial at the very best would be to finish it. And if it was 3 minutes long or 90 minutes long, when you cross that finish line, 20, 30 meters after, if somebody asks you, and how was it? You say, I couldn't have gone a second faster. And that's you have to have a complete, absolute self-belief. I never liked people who'd finish a time trial, find out they'd lost by 5 seconds, go, oh, I wish I'd known, I wish somebody had told me. It's like, well, you did it wrong. It shouldn't matter. You should be able to get to that finish line and go, no, I couldn't have gone a second faster. And that's a lovely kind of place to be in.
Does that mean you're in pain the entire time?
Yeah, it's not pain, it's semantics. Bear with me on this one, because I've thought a lot about this.
Yeah.
In pro cycling, we have obviously different disciplines. The peloton, where it's the group racing, or it's a time trial, it's individual. And the peloton, you're with other riders and they can often dictate the pace. You're following them, you're having to counter-attack. It's a very dynamic style of racing. And often in that situation, if you're having a bad day, you suffer a lot because other riders are making you suffer and you're having to kind of do what they do, not to be out of the race. But the people at the front of the race, who are controlling that, are hurting themselves. They're in control of it. If you're in control of it, I think you're hurting because you're making that decision. If you're not in control, you're suffering because it's being put upon you. And that was this kind of thing that I came to, you always have to go, no, I'm hurting myself. If you're hurting yourself, you're controlling it. I can stop this whenever I like. If you're suffering, you can't stop it. And that's a very clear thing that you get in bike racing. In one race you can have that. You can be suffering at points, but you got to hang on because you know it's going to stop, and then it's like, then you're better, then you can go, then you're hurting, you're making other people suffer. And it's this kind of, I always liked that separation and trying to make sure I avoided suffering, because the moment you start suffering, you disappear into self-pity. It becomes this descending spiral of kind of, why, no, stop. But if you're hurting, it's much different. You're controlling it.
Yeah, it's a perspective that can make all the difference.
Completely.
Can you suffer when you're alone, or does that only happen in the peloton, that experience of hurt and suffer?
Yeah, training was a lot of suffering.
Okay.
And especially towards the end of my career, that's why I kind of had to stop, because I didn't like it anymore.
Right.
I felt like I was suffering.
Right.
And then the descending spiral began.
Because you had gone through that journey of...
I didn't like hurting myself anymore.
Right.
That was it, and I think that happens to every single pro cyclist. That's why you end up stopping, is because you can't do it. You look back, even it could be a year before, or where you enjoyed smashing races to pieces and hurting yourself and doing these really hard races, and most of the time not winning, because that's professional cycling. You have riders that can have a 10-year career and never win a race. It's quite a specialised sport in that respect. But yeah, I mean, that's the moment it started to suffer in training, and that overtook the amount you hurt was when it all starts to go wrong.
Right. It's just not worth the trade anymore.
No, it kind of goes like that.
And that's probably because your body is deteriorating, and also maybe your brain has gone through that entire journey of I'm over this.
Yeah, I think it's first of all mental. There's a little bit of physical, but normally you can overcome it. And I used to speak to this other writer, Jens Vogt, a German guy who was the same generation as me, and even his tagline was kind of "shut up legs," and that became his sort of thing, T-shirts, because he loved suffering. And we kind of both stopped at the same time in that last year, and we both just couldn't do it anymore. And we spoke about this in races, and I said, and I come up with this other theory at the time. I was like, we're born with these certain suffer credits. Right, we're given them
A finite amount.
And I was like, Jens, I think we've used them up. I think they're gone now. And he's like, yeah, that's it. It's like, and I do think, and maybe pro cyclists, really successful ones, are born with a big, and the more successful you are, the bigger the amount you were born with. But eventually it goes.
Right, and then you got to go.
Then you got to go.
And the times don't lie.
No.
So you know what's up.
Get out.
I want to get back to cycling. I want to talk about the tour and a lot of things. But I really wanted to have you on to maybe have a bird's eye perspective on doping involved in all sports. And I know you're very vocal about it, and you're a unique guy because you don't have to be one of these people that can kind of point the finger and say, I've never been there. You've been there and done that. And something that I'm sure was something that was hell for you at the time, I would argue is one of your greatest assets right now, because we can get inside the head of an athlete that's done it, and we can have an honest conversation. And I think most people probably became aware of this with the movie Icarus when it came out, and they saw that, wow, it's this massive potential problem in all sports. And actually that movie started off with cycling, which kind of makes this interesting. And for people that don't know, watch it on Netflix, but it was all about uncovering what looks to be a government Russian doping scandal in all the Olympics across most sports, probably dating back 50, 60, 70 years. And so I was wondering, before we start this conversation, what did you think of that film? And what are some of the things we should know before we talk about this? Because I feel like sometimes people go into this argument really micro and say, that guy shouldn't do this, that guy shouldn't do this. But, I like to even ask the question, why shouldn't drugs be legal in sports? I mean, we're getting the best genetics, the best trainers, the best food, the best mentality. And one day we might be gene doping. So these are the questions I have, and I wanted to get your thoughts.
So the first question regards Icarus, I thought it was a great film. I thought it was, I loved the production values of it as well. It started off as a sort of a fanboy vanity project to a certain degree. And then once, as a great filmmaker, he found a story, you saw the production values just escalate. Boom. The moment that the Russian came in and those Skype calls, you could see it's just like, this is going to be amazing.
Yeah,
and so
the guy was kind of a senior amateur cyclist, and he wanted to see if he could dope and pass the test and be successful.
Exactly.
Right.
So, and that's a common story, and it's a good point of reference to actually check the actual what doping does and how much does it work? Does it affect you that much? And that was the premise of that film. It turned into a bigger question about societal kind of norms and the validity of the Olympics, and where our moral compass lies regards the kind of corporate nature of sport and the responsibility that athletes are put upon at a national level to carry their nation and represent the nation, and using sports and Olympics in particular as a propaganda machine, and those are much bigger questions. And so the film was very clever in that respect. It went from one man's quest to see if doping had made that much effect, to actually this very big macro question about what is sport, what are we using it for in today's society. So I thought that was a very good film. And I guess it brings us on to then doping as a whole. I think it's always been in sport. This is what we need to understand. I think we'd be brainwashed somewhat by the IOC machine, and if we're going back even to Victorian times and kind of moral Christianity, sort of about how the muscular Christianity, of the amateur ethos, and how taking part is more important than winning, which is there, but I think it was lost a long time ago and has been a kind of a very fragile facade for many years. Because when we look at the Olympics and the IOC and the fact that they demand over, I think it's a minimum of $50 million US for the corporate sponsorship. I think it's probably more like 150. They have billions of cash in the bank, and yet the World Anti-Doping Agency, which is partly funded by the IOC, receives, I think, if I'm up to date, I need to be up to date, is about $15 million US a year from WADA. The other $15 million, because IOC will match what the world's governments contribute to WADA. So in order to be a member of IOC and your nation able to compete at an international level, because IOC is like the United Nations of sport, your country must be affiliated to the IOC, your national federation for the sport. Now, your national federation for sport can't be affiliated to the IOC if your country doesn't have a national anti-doping organization, a NADO. The moment you go into sports, we're going into acronym hell. Those NADOs then have to contribute to WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, which is the overseer of all the NADOs. Now, WADA then creates the rule book, the code, as it's called, to universalize the standards across the world on anti-doping. So whether you're a British athlete, a French, an American, a Belgian, a Swiss, an African, you have the same rule book regards what you're allowed to take and not to take. Now, that only happened in the last 20 years. Up until 1999, when WADA was created, there wasn't an international code. Different countries had different rules for what doping was and different anti-doping methods. So going back to that, the amount of funding that these NADOs, the National Anti-Doping Organizations, can rally together across the world is around $15 million US to fund WADA, which sits above everything, which is the global police on doping. IOC then contribute, they will match what all those NADOs and governments can contribute. So that takes a total of $30 million US as the annual budget for the international fight against doping.
Not much money.
No, that's one athlete in Premier League football. And
so this says, almost by definition, how important it is to them.
Yeah, that's how I see it. I mean, that's a drop in their ocean. And so they're not actually, their money, they've barely even got a mouth about it. They're certainly not putting any money into it. And so if we look at that, the stage, and you on a purely ethical level, you see what IOC does to cities and countries with their Olympics. They barely leave legacies. Their recent track record is horrific. What they did in Athens, what they've done in Brazil and Rio. They go in, they're strong words, but they pillage the local resources, exploit them, and then leave them there to rot. IOC, for me, is fundamentally flawed. And we look to them as being the bastion of ethics and morals.
Because they have the Olympic brand, which must be all things great about
Exactly.
you.
And that's the top of the pyramid.
That's the top of the pyramid, and everything else flows down from there.
So you can understand why everything, by the time you get to the bottom, has become even more toxic.
Okay. And doping has been around, you said, even to Victorian times.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look back, there's been, as soon as there was any medical, cocaine, alcohol, they were even using, back in the day, like strychnine and painkillers. So it's been there, and it's been there for a long time. And it's slowly, I think, when we look at professional sport today, and this is what I love, it's the ultimate irony. Professional cycling is now at the absolute forefront of anti-doping, because we had the biggest doping problem. And we had to fix it, otherwise the sport was going to be destroyed, and it was the economics, if you like, that saved it, because sponsors were not interested in funding professional cycling teams because it was only bad publicity. So the sport actually inherently had to fix itself in order to attract those sponsors, and anti-doping actually became a monetizable entity within the sport. If your team could prove that it was clean and had a great track record, then you would attract bigger sponsors. So it was the economics that kind of saved us. And now we've been the guinea pigs for the latest testing methods, be it the EPO test, be it the blood test, the whereabouts systems, all these different things that have contributed. And I think today one of the biggest, apart from the code that was created by WADA, the international code, which then created the same playing field for the whole world, it's been the ability, the access to the internet, which has created a whereabouts system so every athlete can log in onto this kind of cloud which then tells you where you are during the day, so you can always be found for random testing. So, I mean, I could talk for hours on that because my knowledge is pretty deep, having been on the Water Athletes Commission for 4 years and working with NADOs for years and being a doper. And as you said, I think that's, and this is, excuse me if I jump around a bit, a lot of people talk about lifetime bans for first-time offence, which makes no sense because we don't have that in society at large. And the human condition, the way we learn is by learning from mistakes. And those mistakes often generate regrets, and those regrets prevent those mistakes happening in the future. If I hadn't been given a second chance and come back in, I wouldn't be able to educate people. I wouldn't have been able to force as much change as I have done since. I'd have just disappeared, and this thing would keep happening. So it's one thing, I mean, don't get me wrong, not everybody's going to have the same will or have the background or the culture that I have in education to come back in and the will to do what I've done. But I think I'm the greatest example of what a second chance can do and how it can help, and how a lifetime ban to athletes who are generally, it's not their sole fault. We give them kind of complete responsibility for their actions. Whereas often, as we saw with going back to Icarus, it can come from a national source and an international source. So the entourage around you is so big and the pressure is so culturally huge, and the expectations, societal expectations, can be overpowering on these young athletes who, when they start, and imagine pro cyclists, when they start and they just want to ride their bike and get out, they never think they're going to be in the global stage and have to be injecting to fly the flag. That happens because that's then drummed into them. And yet when it comes to punishing them, you only punish them. We need to be punishing the entourage around. And they tried it with the IOC, as we saw in Icarus, trying to ban Russia from the Olympics, and we saw the mess that came to. But that's the only way you start to do it, is by kind of going up the ladder. And that's what you do in criminal law. That's what you do in civil law as well. You try to look for the cause, not the effect. Okay,
so the big thing we should see as the public is don't go and persecute the individual. Look at the team and the system.
If you've done something wrong, you need to be punished. But it's normally the threat of that punish or the punishment. It then has to be gauged depending on what the crime was and what you can offer to prevent it happening. So that's normally how you, so a drug dealer, they don't want the person who's just smoking it or injecting it. They want the person who gave it to you, bought it off. They don't want that person, they want the person above them. No, we don't do that in sport at the moment. We don't do that usual chain of effects, if you like. Yes, you should always be punished, but it should be relative to the actions, the mistakes you've made.
And in the movie, we saw that ultimately no one was really punished, right? Because the IOC needs to be in bed with all these governments, right? So things kind of just moved on.
Yeah, exactly, because the IOC is a propaganda machine. You know, governments want it because it's a feel-good to their country, to their voters, to the people that keep them in power. And I mean, I know stories of what the IOC are like when they come to cities. I mean, they demand the same kind of, they expect what heads of state expect regards treatment by nations and governmental officials, because they are essentially a state.
And what about the public that watches these events and ultimately pays for these sports and buys the tickets and, you know, watches the TV shows that appear? Why do we get so angry when someone's cheating and doping, and yet we want the best of the best? Is this a weird way that we look at ourselves?
No, I don't think. I think it's right, and it's what the viewer should expect from sport. No, don't get me. The essence is right. That Olympic essence is right, and that's what sport should be. It should be people, the humans at their best, kind of on a stage. It's going back to that Grecian ideal of it. Day-to-day life is quite monotonous, and we're quite contained, and we don't get to live those extremes of the human condition. And so we try and project that onto these athletes, onto these sportsmen, sportswomen, going through these extreme experiences, taking themselves to this kind of this other plane, and then battling against each other. It's a very human thing to want to watch that, because it is storytelling. We build stories behind those athletes or those teams, and when they're fighting each other, they're not just fighting them individually, they're fighting those two stories are becoming mixed up, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's great entertainment, and that's what sport is. And entertainment at its best should make you feel something, and sport can make you feel, as a viewer, really something that you're not going to get in your day-to-day life. And so it's worth fighting for.
What about the testing? I mean, we watched the movie Icarus, and it opens up with some very key people saying the testing doesn't work. We watch it pretty much almost not work. We watched, Lance Armstrong, probably the most tested athlete in human history, not work. How do we get our heads around these things not being effective, even with all the technology?
So I suppose that's a bigger question, because where there's a will, there's always a way. And with the advancements in technology, you could probably always beat tests if you have the right people around you, or the wrong people around you.
Right. I mean, in the case of Icarus, it was the testers that knew how to beat the test.
Which is the ultimate, but it's, I think we've got to look further up the chain than that. We have to get to a point where it becomes a cultural no-no, so you don't actually have to get to the testing. If we're relying just on the testing to kind of stop doping, then we're being very short-sighted. You have to get to a point where the athletes do not want to take drugs. That's talking about whole cultural changes, about societal expectations, about education from a young age, about giving them the most positive entourages that look after them, like healthy families and villages, if to use that sort of parenthèse, that they're not in these negative spaces surrounded. So you actually get to the point where you can believe in it, where you're watching the sport, and it's going to take maybe decades for us to really truly believe in all sports again. Because I think we're in the right direction. But that it's not about the testing. You actually believe in it because we'll look back on now in the end of the 20th century and the turn of the 21st century, the dark ages of elite sport, because the athletes basically had to wear tags. They had to do this because we didn't trust any of them. They were in this cloud whereabouts system. They were tested, they were blood tested, urine tested. And because we've got to the point where the actual bigger issue hasn't been confronted yet and hasn't been solved. That there's still that sporting world that we want to put on that paragon of excellence, and the human condition at its best has actually been corrupted by the normal world. We need to now turn it into a better world. And it's not just testing that will do that. But then we go back to the fundamental problem is IOC, that is not a better world.
Is the IOC the problem because it oversees everything else, or is it just the amount of money that's also involved in professional sport?
Money's a huge thing, like everything in life. That can twist things very quickly. I feel quite bagging the IOC so much because I've been invited to speak at a conference in Buenos Aires in a month.
But like you said,
they know my point of view.
They know your points, but that dictates what a lot of other people do because they look up to WADA. Right?
It's like having the patriarch of the family.
Right.
The patriarch of the family, if they're a great patriarch, that tends to trickle down. If they're a godfather mafia boss, then that tends to trickle down as well. So it's like everything. If you want to change a culture, you're going to have to start from the top and then set the example, lead. It's like old war stories and all these great old stories of old there's always those hero figures that lead people into things for the right reasons. The good kings, if you like, not the shadow kings. And IOC needs to be a good king, not a shadow king.
Is cycling changing? I mean, is British cycling changing?
British cycling has changed massively in the space of 20 years. It's gone from being a little cult, niche, weird sport to arguably the biggest sport in the UK. And that's been done the right way. So that's a new culture. That was using the Olympics in the best possible way. They did a British team, used all these old-fashioned values and actually applied them to it and moved to science. And they created the greatest British Olympic team in history with the cycling team. They then transferred that expertise with Sir Dave Brailsford, who led that whole team into the Tour de France, changed that. And what they've done is actually had huge cultural ramifications in the whole sport because they've proven what's possible with science, by being hyper-rational, by training the athletes in new ways, by actually also looking after their mental health, also creating bigger support networks, more solid sponsors, a better business model. And British cycling and that's again where we go back to the sort of that trickle down. What is now Team Sky has had a massive trickle down, and before that the British Olympic cycling team had a massive trickle down, and it's given a really positive experience to what being a cyclist is in the UK now, from using those platforms in the right way.
And all of that will lead to less doping as well.
Yeah, because that's, again, you've got the British system, which is UK anti-doping, UCAD, back to acronyms,
Yeah.
is a very great, it's one of the real flag bearers of the anti-doping, national anti-doping organisations in the world. And then also, I think the British culture in sport is a very healthy one when it comes to sort of cheating,
Yeah.
which is what it always comes down to. We use doping, but it's actually cheating. We've got to, again, semantics. But and so cheating is a pretty big deal in our sport, and I think that's kind of been the bedrock of how it's kind of advanced so well here, using all these modern methods. Because you speak to these young kids now who I know in their early 20s who have gone through the programs, and they're so far removed from doping. They just can't even comprehend it. It's a non-subject to them. This is what I was meaning about the fact that the whereabouts system, the testing, it makes no difference to them because they are so culturally removed from it. They can't fathom it. It's so ingrained in them that that is cheating, that it's wrong. And they've got all those people around them that they know if they do it, it's all over. They don't need those threats because it's embedded now in that culture, which is amazing.
That's amazing. A lot of people would probably find that hard to believe because when Lance Armstrong's around on Tour de France, I mean, I don't know what the statistics were, but they said if everyone had been tested the way he had been tested, it would be like number 16 would have won the race because everyone would have been disqualified. I mean, sport was rife with it.
Yeah.
And it can change that quickly with a cultural way of looking at things.
Yeah, it can, because if you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, it is the cultural thing is to use an American term, the locker room. If in the locker room it's considered wrong to dope, to cheat, then that's massive. That's a real strong kind of preventative kind of cultural tool, because if your peers know that kind of that's how it feels. And that's how it's felt when I was racing, when Lance Armstrong was racing, we were in a doping culture. Like the peloton, you kind of knew people were doping, kind of people let it fly, we knew the system wasn't looking after us, we didn't look after each other. We had a doping culture.
Didn't people talk about it in the peloton?
Yeah, you would. You'd have people would be working with this doctor. There'd always be Chinese whispers about what the new product was, kind of who'd been on some mystery training camp, what team was all flying all of a sudden. It was just that was the kind of, that's how it went. Now it's the opposite. It's a real anti-doping culture in that peloton. There's people, if something's suspicious, they'll flag it. There's no more systematic doping. If there is, and don't get me wrong, there always will be, because it's human nature to cheat at some level. But it's instead, as before, it was if you like, a doping culture where it was a minority that didn't. Now it's flipped. Now it's an anti-doping culture with a minority who dope, and they're kind of outliers. Whereas in the Lance Armstrong era, the non-dopers were the outliers. And that's happened in the space of 15, 20 years.
That's
15 years.
I remember hearing his stories because he was originally in the States and doing one-day races, and then we went to Tour de France. He was over there and obviously wanted to kick ass, but I think he looked around with his teammates and said, unless we get with this doping program, we have no chance. We might as well go home.
He's the ultimate pragmatist, Lance, and
back to rationality.
Yeah, exactly. Super alpha athlete, and he rationalized the landscape, made a decision, and went with it, all guns blazing, and did it better than anybody else. But and it was that, and yeah, that's Lance just took it to the extreme, if you like, just did it better, and because he was better.
What do you think people don't understand about his story and Lance Armstrong journey? From being there, I mean, you were what it's like to get up every day and do that stuff, to be in that culture. I mean, a lot of people, they look at the story, they kind of judge, they do that, but what don't we know? Or how would you put it in perspective? I know you worked on like a dramatization of kind of those events, and you wanted to make sure he got a fair shake as a fellow cyclist.
Yeah, I worked pretty hard on making sure that what they did want to portray was softened down. I think what it is with Lance is he's such a complex character, yet he's so simple as well. You kind of want to think there's hidden depths, and there aren't. Then you think you're there. He's such a strange cat, and and I think that's what people don't know. You can't project what you think you know onto Lance, because it doesn't apply. Lance truly is a very exceptional human being, And then you put that exceptional human being into those exceptional circumstances, and it was the perfect storm. And I think we try to use kind of our own experiences or what we've learned and try to project them onto that situation at that point in time. And it's a waste of time, because that was such a unique moment in sports with a unique sport with a unique human being. Because I do believe Lance is unique. You know, he's for better and worse.
How so?
He's just, yeah, because normally I'm quite good at analysing people, and I find it very hard to analyse Lance. It's kind of like blur on him for me. I don't understand what that is. It's I can't quite get my finger on Lance. He's one of the very few people in the world that is like that for me, and that kind of throws me a bit.
Like you said, in some ways it's very simple, because you look at him and it's like, I want to win at all costs, and I will win, and I'm going to keep winning, and it's about me winning.
Yeah.
But then, like you said, it can't be that simple. There's more complexity there.
Yeah, I mean, there is, and I think if you see what Sir Dave Brailsford and Team Sky have done with modern cycling, they've gone in with they rationalised everything and figured that a lot of people weren't doing it this way, so we'll do it that way and it's going to work better, which is what they did. And Lance did that. He took that sort of attitude to that doping era. I was like, oh fuck, it's like these guys are doping, but they're doing it terribly. It's like, this is going to be like I think he saw it as kind of all that. I think he enjoyed that part of the game.
Right.
I think he'd gone way above the rights and wrongs of it. He was like, this is just like child's play. These guys are morons. And he had the kind of the physical and mental capacity to kind of do that, build the right team of people around him, kind of have those very clear sort of objectives and drive. He's an amazing man motivator. So I think it's quite hard for us to go, Lance was this or that, because I don't think it ever crossed his mind about right and wrong. He just saw it as this amazing game, right. Like not just a sport, a game, and he loved playing it. And I think he still does. He still loves the game.
The game of?
For his life, just messing with people's heads.
Trying to win and messing with people's heads.
Yeah.
And I think people never felt remorse from Lance, and that's probably why he's still persecuted, right? Because he's ultimately not really sorry, because why should he be, right? He was just trying to compete at his game, right?
No, yeah, exactly. And I think Lance isn't a romanticist. He doesn't really, I don't think he dabbles in the greater sphere of rhetoric and kind of the natural narrative curves that we're used to. He doesn't kind of believe in those or need them. And I think we as society like a 3-act play. We like kind of rises, falls, redemptions. And I don't think Lance really thinks he fell.
Right.
So,
probably right.
Yeah.
Were you surprised how that played out? Were you surprised that he was never actually, because he never tested positive. He was tested over 500 times, they said. Did that surprise you?
No, I never tested positive.
Right.
I was arrested and they found syringes in my apartment. And then I admitted because it was the end game and I wanted out anyway, but that it was possible to beat the system. You know, it was the game. If we're kind of changing again the kind of wording of it, I think for the top players, and it was that was all part of the sport. It's the machinations of the sport. So the moral compass hadn't just gone skew; it had been smashed. You know, nobody even knew where the moral compass was anymore, because there was no north. And I think Lance was the best at navigating that. He could just he saw it all differently.
Right.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it was his teammates that kind of got him busted, because it was maybe projecting his ego and trying to keep it quiet, and finally they had enough.
Yeah, I think he's very charismatic, Lance, and I think he probably thought his charisma alone could keep them in line. But eventually, kind of the more time away from him, the more that charisma didn't have the effect, and they did all start to sort of crumble one by one. And I guess that was the only flaw in the plan, if you like, was thinking you could control individuals, but eventually they all kind of realised what they'd done had been wrong, and their moral compass started to work again.
Right.
And I think the moment they all started seeing north, they were like, oh, hang on a second, I think we did something wrong there.
Right, we've got to say what's going on.
Yeah.
You started competing, because you enjoyed it. And again, you know, doping wasn't even on your mind. Maybe you didn't even know it was out there. But at some point, it became something because you had to stay competitive, right? Because you were getting more and more famous. And I'm sure there's lots of athletes that are going to watch this, and they're going to maybe come to a point in their career where they've got an option to go left or right. And you've been there. And I was wondering what you would tell them to do in that case. I mean, it's great if they're around a British team where there's a culture of we don't do that. But you know, there can be hard times. I mean, you had injuries, big expectations. You get to where all the money and the fame is now expected of you. What do you do in that situation?
I mean, you use left or right. I kind of think you have to stay straight. You have to be so clear in kind of what you believe in, even at times when you can't see it for clouds and fog. And because if you do kind of veer off it, left or right, then you never get back on it. It's this weirdest thing. And that's why I try to explain to younger athletes, you can do it and you might get away with it. You might kind of get some riches down that road, but it's never going to be the good road, because you'll then have mental health issues. You're then going to live a lie. You will be found out. Never forget, you will be found out.